Hello and welcome to episode 28 of Matchett and the Other Guy. And Kevin and I are sitting outside my home on the banks of Lake Wylie in Charlotte, North Carolina on a wonderfully sunny spring-like day, Kevin.
I believe this is our best day yet for sitting out here.
Of the year, for sure. Most definitely.
This year, no doubt.
Yes, a couple of times when we've recorded earlier episodes leading up into this one, it's been sunny but pretty cold. But today it's beautiful.
Very temperate. The lake is gorgeous.
Yes.
A little slight breeze.
And we know we must be getting into springtime because there are a couple of geese building a nest down on the point there. And I don't want to go anywhere near them. I mean, geese are pretty grumpy chaps at the best of times, but I think when there's kids involved, you don't want to go anywhere near them. So we'll leave them alone down there, but I'm kind of fascinated to see the process unfold.
Oh, I think you're going to have a whole nature show right in your front window here for quite some time.
Yeah, Mum-to-Be is buried in the rocks right at the edge of the point. It's almost difficult to see her, actually, and Dad is just on patrol, sometimes walking around the grass and sometimes swimming left and right in front of where Mum's made the nest. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll report on their progress, should progress in future episodes.
Yes, numbers and such as we go.
Yeah, it'd be kind of fun. Yeah. Well, yes, episode 28 we said, right? So what are we talking about today?
Well, we take a quote from George Bernard Shaw,
yes,
who said that England and America are two countries separated by a common language.
Yes, well, that's right. Well, we discover that every time we do a podcast.
I think after all these episodes, our listeners may have found out the secret is that you're British. So we've probably let that cat out of the bag. I'd like to hear some thoughts on when you came over and terms that were new and different to you, and how there's the same things are said in England and such like that.
Yes. Well, most definitely there are differences. We know that. Tomato, tomatoes, potatoes, let's call the whole thing off. But my experience of language, I am extremely laid back and unfussed and unfazed by the difference of anybody using different words and pronunciations of different words and dialects and accents. Because having lived in France for 15 years on and off, and my French being passable at best, I learned in those 15 years a very valuable lesson that language is just a matter of communication between folks. Don't get all bent out of shape by using the wrong verbs and the wrong sentence structure and whatever it is, you're just trying to get your point over. Yep. Right? Some people really do get upset by, you should never say this, why are you saying that? And just relax. As long as you can communicate with one another, I'm good with it. Yes. The first one that springs to mind is the difference between chips and crisps. That's a classic.
Yep.
Chips. We're doing this in the States, so most of our American audience, of course, will be aware of what chips are. But of course, chips in England or Britain, I suppose, in a wider sense, obviously is French fried potatoes, and crisps are chips.
Yes,
that's right. So, I've got to the point now, spending so long over here, that I started to get that blend of words going. I was talking to a good friend in England the other day, and I said chips instead of crisps, and there was a little moment when we're trying to think, what's Steve talking about now? But
yep.
Yeah.
Well, you said one. We were just having a conversation, not during recording, but you used the term shopping cart, and I said, "Oh, I'm surprised you didn't say trolley."
Shopping trolley, yeah.
So yes, you're becoming Americanized as we go.
Yes. Well, there's lots of them. There's endless ones. I mean, tomato and tomato is the big one, isn't it? Really.
Aluminum and aluminium.
Aluminium.
Yeah.
Yes, but the difference between aluminium and aluminum is in the spelling itself. Of course, it's not just the odd pronunciation of it. It's actually spelt differently. I have no explanation for that. I've researched this a little bit just out of curiosity in my love of language and writing. And I get the impression that, of course, language is always evolving. It just is an evolving organic thing. It never stays stationary for very long. And English is a language, back over in the old country, in England, of course, is just a mishmash, really, of every other power that has invaded and conquered England over the centuries.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of Germanic language in there, the German language in there from the Goths, and there's a little bit of Viking language in there, and of course it's French in there from when France got overexcited and spent way too long over in England, and for about 1,000 years I think primary language in England was French as a result, so that's diffused into the language. So there's all that going on. And then of course if you just take the English language in isolation and look how that language has changed in its structure and its sounds, its dialect and accent in Canada, into the United States, over in Australia, mate,
Yep.
and it is an organic flowing thing. So again, I'm so laid back with it, like, don't get bent out of shape by it. It's just the language evolving. But I think English is possibly the classic example of that. I may be wrong. I'm certainly no linguistics expert, but English always strikes me as an absolute. It's a bit of a reflection on the United States. Actually, if we think of the United States as being a melting pot of all different cultures in the world, I think English, the spoken English language, is the same as that. It's a mishmash of everybody else's tongue.
Well, a prime example of something like that, and we have so many different dialects and such in our country and regions and such like that. But a prime example of us, not defining or being able to define how we say something sometimes, and getting into a good discussion with somebody, sometimes heated about, is how you do carbonated beverages. The geese have definitely decided to say hello today. Those are not our mom and pop. These are we assume the cousins that are making their songs.
Our mating couple down there hardly say a word. I guess that's all part of it, that they want to remain hidden. But the bachelors are having a party.
Yes, they're enjoying the spring day as well.
Yes. Sorry, what were we saying?
Back to where I was. If you're in different parts of the country and you want a sugary carbonated beverage, it depends on what you ask for. You can order a soda. Yeah. You can ask for a pop, or you can ask for a Coke. Yeah. I grew up in the Southeast where pretty much Coke was everything. You may, if you were at somebody's house and they say, "Hey, you want a Coke?" and you don't know what you're going to get handed. You could be handed a Coke. You could be handed a Dr. Pepper. You could be handed a Sprite. You could be handed a RC Cola.
Yeah. So
whatever.
Like, the brand becomes the noun effectively, right? So over in England, I would always say, instead of vacuuming, we would hoover. Yeah, we would hoover. You've probably heard me say that here.
Which is the brand name, correct?
Which is the brand name. It's a very popular brand name, yes, but we would always hoover up, not vacuum up. Let's say that.
Yeah, of course, we're vacuumers here. But there's also definitely the ones that you don't put on a bandage, you put on a Band-Aid.
Yes.
And of course that's a brand. Don't grab me a box of tissues. Hey, grab me a box of Kleenex.
Yes.
We do a lot of that.
Yes. No, I don't think in England we would say, hand me a Kleenex. But I think we'd say tissue. Yeah, it is fascinating to me. I'm always fascinated by language and the way different people use it.
But it was amazing to see anyone, like in school or something like that, or maybe a new kid in school or something like that, and they'd use the word pop for their soda. And we're like, oh, I've never...
Yes, I would always...
used to that.
Yeah, I grew up with pop, of course. That's a very English expression to me, pop. And soda... again, things may change. We've just talked about the language being organic, and things may change, and perhaps that's more frequently used now in England. But none of my school friends, when we were growing up, would say soda. We wouldn't know what they're talking about. Really, cream soda maybe was a rather ghastly drink we occasionally used to have.
What was the generic term for like a Coke or Pepsi?
It was just a
like
pop.
Just a pop. Yeah.
We'd have a bottle of pop. Very rarely did we have cans. But if it was a Coke, it was absolutely a Coca-Cola. It would be a Coca-Cola.
Yeah, I could see that if you lived in a region where they usually use pop or something like that and said you want a Coke, then you're going to get a Coke.
Yes. And the wonderful thing to me about spoken English over in England, or again, in the wider sense, all of the United Kingdom, is there are so many regional variations of dialect and accent within what is in fact a relatively small landmass. I mean, you could take all of the United Kingdom and drop it into California.
Yeah.
But yet, in England, and again, my ear's probably gone off it a little bit because I'm no longer living there, but typically you could place somebody where they were born or where they've been living most of their life. You could place them within 50 miles just by hearing their accent, because it would change so much. the London accent, the Cockney accent, it would be so different to the Brummy Birmingham accent, to the Oxford accent, to the BBC accent, and all over the Midlands accents, and going to the further north, and of course the wonderful Liverpudlian accent, which most folks are familiar with from the Beatles. Then moving further north until you get into Scotland, and of course that wonderful Scottish brogue. Over to Ireland, you could tell that instantly. I love all of that. I love language for that reason, and I'm certainly, as we've talked about, I'm very new, realistically, to the United States, and I try to listen to accents and dialect in the States, and I'm very, very far from perfect, but I can now tell the difference between, let's say, New York to Boston to the Carolinas to California. I can hear those accents, and I'm guessing, and you're our expert sitting here at the table with it, I'm guessing there are 10,000 other accents in the middle of all of those.
Oh, I'm sure. And again, I always lived in the Southeast, so I've never really lived in another region to be around one. But now Florida was a very much a melting pot within a melting pot. So many people move to Florida from so many different areas that you tend to get a lot of dialects combining down there, and people, and then they retire and they live down there many years, and they change. Their structures changes of their dialect too. So yeah, I was pretty much 8 years there.
Yeah.
And actually, I definitely remember people wanting to hear me talk when I first moved down there because it's from Tennessee. I remember people back in Tennessee saying in my latter years, they said that my accent had changed from being down there.
Yes, and it's funny you should say that, because I often get those comments when I go back to the Midlands in England, which is where I was born and raised. I don't think I've got a particularly strong regional accent. I mean, I'm sure a lot of folks will instantly be able to recognise Matchett's English. I can hear it in him, and I get that. But I suspect it's rather difficult to place whereabouts I was born. I've never really been in one place that long in my adult life. I left Nottingham, Leicestershire, Loughborough to move down to Whitney and Oxford for work with Benetton. And so I never really, and again, as we've chatted about before, I spent so much of my time alone that I feel that I just never absorbed fully the local accents and dialects. Before, there's a little town called Coalville, close to Loughborough, which is famous for one thing, coal. There's a lot of mining industry around there. And I could tell that somebody was from Coalville, which is literally 10 miles away from where I grew up. And yet, if they were born and raised in Leicester, which is 15 miles away, that would be different. And Nottingham had a different accent. But I don't think I ever really absorbed it fully. And then, of course, I spent time over in France, and English simply wasn't spoken where I was in that corner of France. But curiously, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before, I lived in the Charente-Maritime, right near Cognac, right near Bordeaux. I know I've mentioned that before. And so that is where I learned to speak French with my neighbours. And of course, they have many regional accents and patois, just as much as we have different accents. Of course, we do it in the French language. And I do remember one remarkable day talking to Madame Fauconnet in her kitchen. She had an old school friend in her kitchen when I went round for coffee one day. This chap started to talk to me, and I've got to say, Kevin, as much as I tried, I could hardly understand the word that this guy was saying to me. And I was trying my best, and we were communicating, but it was really difficult for me to get the grasp of what this chap was saying. Roll forward about an hour and a half, and this chap leaves, and Madame Fauconnet says to me, "You didn't really understand an awful lot of what," I can't remember what the chap's name, let's call him Marcel. "You didn't really understand an awful lot of what Marcel was saying, did you?" And she was smiling as she was saying, and I said, "No, it was really difficult for me." And she said, "This is what made me feel better." She said, "No, I didn't really understand an awful lot he was saying either, because he's got such a strong regional patois accent, it's difficult for me to understand
there you go.
it. So what chance do I stand, And that is most certainly the case. To me, that wonderful Scottish brogue, but the difference between the lowlands of Scotland and the highlands of Scotland, they are sometimes so very difficult for me to understand, And I've noticed watching some TV programs in the States that when there is a strong Irish accent being spoken, English, but a strong Irish accent or a strong Scottish accent, that the TV networks find it necessary to put subtitles up there to help us all along.
Yeah,
it can be that difficult. Yeah, and I understand it. It really can be, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's funny that the first example you even said out of the gate was talking about the difference between chips here and crisps there.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this topic, and I said I'm definitely going to go back to this. And we visited this before, and we're going to visit it, I'm sure, numerous times. But the Young Ones was really my heavy introduction into British slang and terms and such like that.
Yeah.
And I still remember, I can't remember exactly which episode, but they're in the bar, and Vivian orders a bag of roast ox crisps. And that was my very first thing of, they're ordering a bag of chips. Now, I grew up, eating fish and chips. Now, in America, people are going to laugh because it was Long John Silver's or Captain D's, which you're probably like, ooh. But, we would go for that. So I was used to that. And then we talked about me watching Benny Hill when I was young.
Yes.
But so much of that is just skit comedy. There was really no, he had some skits with dialogue, but a lot of them were just slapstick.
Absolutely.
So it was really the Young Ones that I got to notice these new terms. And for many years, I still didn't know what they were talking about. I knew the gist of it. I knew it was hilarious. I knew I loved it. But, I can rewatch them now and understand much more of what they're talking about in the conversation.
Yes. And I guess a lot of the reason for that, and I may be wrong, is because the way that technology has improved communication across the Atlantic and around the world, we are more exposed on both sides of the Atlantic to our different cultures. Of course, as kids growing up, we were always surrounded by American cop shows. Kojak is the one that springs to mind, and Columbo, for example. Starsky and Hutch, But we'd be surrounded, so we'd be hearing the American accents all the time. As a kid growing up in England, I could never place an accent in the States. I couldn't say, that chap is from New York, definitely, and this chap is from Los Angeles. I couldn't do that. But I guess with a lot more British TV shows coming over, and with streaming services being able to watch a lot more of those shows, it's probably, I'd like to think, becoming easier for folks in the States to understand the different accents and dialects.
Yeah, and again, just the terms. It's like, you'd watch a show or something like that. Now I know holiday means vacation.
Yes.
You're not going to go to college, you're going to go to university.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're not going to take the elevator, you're going to take the lift.
That's right.
The baby doesn't get pushed around in a stroller, she gets pushed around in a pram.
Yeah, pram or a pushchair.
Pushchair is a new one on me.
Yes. I have a feeling that I think stroller might be more on the increase in England. I can't explain the reason for that. I'm guessing maybe, I don't know, the language is changing, evolving, what we said. But you're absolutely right, yes. The lift and elevator is one that...
and one that'll really throw you off is when you're talking about the elements on a car. Because if you tell an English mechanic to go lift the hood, what's he going to mess with? He's going to mess with the convertible top.
Yeah.
And of course, in England, then what we know is the hood is the bonnet.
Yeah.
And then you don't have a trunk in England. You have a
boot. Yeah.
So you learn things, especially if you have an old English roadster like an MG or a Triumph for healing or something.
Yes. Now, do you chaps over in the States use the word prawns for shrimp at all? You're aware of it, but never use it.
I think maybe if it's like a certain size one. Like if it's the large ones and you're at a seafood place or a seafood restaurant, you may see it on the menu or choices as a prawn.
So it'd be a prawn cocktail. But they'd be big. They'd be big prawn. Big
I don't
shrimp,
even want to say that for sure. Because, you're talking about probably hearing shrimp 99.99% of the time and maybe prawn the other time.
Yes, yeah.
Maybe coming more into it. And slightly, because there's that Muppet character, Pepe the Prawn, that might have helped a little bit.
I think it might have missed him, but okay.
He's one of my favorite characters from the 20X years. He's been out now or something like that.
Yes, well, certainly in England, prawns, in my time anyway, again, the language is changing all the world, prawns were very small shrimp.
Oh, I think they're the larger ones here. I could
yes,
be wrong,
well, that just gives an example of how things can be confusing. In another episode, a previous episode of Matchett and the Other Guy, were we not discussing the Kershaw man that used to go round the pubs on a Friday or Saturday with his wicker basket? And he would sell you a bag of prawns, which were tiny shrimp, but you wouldn't ask him for shrimp because I don't think he'd know what they would be. But I do remember on one of my first trips over working with Speed Vision, I did ask the waiter when we went out to dinner one night for a prawn. Do you have a prawn cocktail? And there was a sort of long period of, what is this chap talking about? Until somebody, helped me with shrimp.
Yeah,
shrimp. Okay, yes.
Not know what it is.
Yes. Well, that's the language. I think it's a great thing. And again, I keep falling back on. It was my experiences in a completely foreign land and foreign language to me in France that just changed my opinion entirely. That don't get caught up on this. It's nonsense. It's just communication. But I do remember quite often I used to spend one night in Paris before flying over to New York to cover the race, whatever Grand Prix it would be, for Speed Vision, because there was no way that I could leave home down in the Charente near Cognac, catch the train, get to Paris in the south, take the metro from the south of Paris, Montparnasse station, up to the north to Charles de Gaulle Airport to catch the plane in one day. I physically couldn't. There was no way I could do it. The train service didn't allow that to happen. And the planes used to leave at, let's say it was 1:30 in the afternoon. It was simply impossible to do it. So the only way that I could do the commute was to go up to Paris the night before and spend the night in Paris. Dreadful hardship, spend the night in Paris. It was, I was okay with it, believe me. And I used to stay in a wonderful little place, a little hotel in Saint-Germain-des-Prés, which is a wonderful little quarter of Paris, and where all the great writers and artists and poets used to hang around in the 20s. So it's kind of fun to still see the buildings and the roads are just the same. Nothing's really changed. But I do remember ordering dinner, just something simple in a cafe in a bar in Paris. And I remember the waiter saying, "Do you live in the Charente-Maritime?" I think he said to me. And I said, I do, yes. I could hear it in your accent.
Wow.
So I don't know if that's good or bad, but obviously I just picked that up. My accent developed completely without my knowledge of it through talking to Monsieur and Madame Fauconnet in their kitchen.
Yeah.
And so they must also have a very detectable regional accent, I guess.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you said very early on in this conversation was, you don't get all wound up about, the dialect, worrying about it and all that. And I think that comes to the core thing of our humanity and talking with other people is if we can keep it simple and not be too wound up about it, things are going to communicate a lot better and a lot easier. Because I'm sure when you were trying your best to do your French with the Fauconnets, they were never, critical or insulted by if you did it incorrectly. They were more than happy to just let it flow, and you had your conversations as best you could.
You absolutely hit the nail on the head there. That is a vital element in my experience of travel abroad. If you're in a foreign land, try to adapt. Even if it's just hello and goodbye and thank you. Try and make the effort. And I always think, take England for example, Great Britain. If you go over to France, a lot of English expect English to be spoken, and in Paris, there's a good chance that's going to happen. Waiters are most likely employed because of their language skills, and you'll still get a lot of folks that'll speak English and not even attempt to speak a few words of French. Okay, I get that, but you could say merci, thank you, and très bien, or whatever it would be. You can try and get a response from them, and the French will react very positively. But can you imagine for 1 second if a couple on holiday, French couple for example, arrived in London and went to a pub and just talked French to the barman?
Yeah,
we could get wouldn't get anywhere. There's this sort of why do English speaking folk expect everybody else to understand us, but conversely, when you turn it around the other way, and it could be a couple from Germany, or a couple from Italy, or from Spain, or from Portugal, Japan, or wherever it would be, to arrive into an English pub and speak their native tongue and be surprised that they get no response.
Yeah.
You know? So I always think of it, try and turn the table the other way and see how that works for you. But I agree with you 100%. And again, my personal experience, so that's really all I can talk about. The French were delighted when foreigners to France try and speak a few words of French. It really means a great deal to them. The French are incredibly passionate, quite rightly so, and proud of their language. And they delight in the fact that other folks may want to learn it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't made my way to France yet, or England for that matter. But I think we've touched on it before. We did go to Austria.
Yeah.
And I think one of the best moments I had there was one morning. There was 4 of us together in the place we were visiting and such. But I went down to the local market. I think I was buying croissants for breakfast. But I went through the whole process of going to market, asking for what I wanted, and did all that. And I tried my best, in German to do it. And everything went swimmingly.
Well done, well done you. I
Yeah.
think it's a vital thing. You should. I think it's a great thing to be able to do. I don't know. It annoys me. I have to say, it's one of the things that annoys me when I hear folks. I understand they may not speak a foreign language. I absolutely get that. But this idea, there's almost like a slight annoying arrogance in some folks that why are you not speaking English to me?
Yes.
No, we're in a foreign land.
Yes.
This is not England. It's not the United States or Australia or any other English-speaking nation. You're in a country that does not have English as its primary language. You have to make an adjustment.
Yeah, and I was very grateful for the ones that did, so they made our trip much easier and things that we couldn't get across, and they worked with us, and everything went well.
Yes, I mean, I do remember a lot of the times I spent time in Paris, as I've just described it, the night before a flight. Waiters would delight in speaking English. I could speak French, but they could tell instantly that I was not French. I get that, and I'm not embarrassed by that at all. But and if the waiter, for example, wanted to speak English, I would converse in English because I always felt it was good practice for him or her to use their language skills because that's their profession.
Sure.
We're employed to speak English, and I absolutely get that. But the saving grace for me in having to learn French, we may have chatted about before, is right in the middle of the French countryside, there isn't any English being spoken. So you can't fall back on it because it will get you nowhere. In fact, Madame Fauconnet never knowingly spoke a word of English. But she used to use the word weekend for the weekend. But she never realized until I pointed it out to her one day that I said, do you know where the origin of weekend comes from? Well, it's just just fin de semaine, huh? No, it's not just the end of the week. It's an English expression for the end of the week, the end of the weekend. And until that point, she said, good gracious, I never realized it was an English expression I was using. Thought it was French.
Very good.
Yes, so it's kind of fun. But language is a fun thing. I wish I spoke 100 languages. I don't, but I wish I did. I'm rather getting too old and set in my ways to do it now. And another language that I absolutely adore to hear, but unfortunately I don't speak any, is Japanese. I think to hear Japanese spoken softly is a beautiful language. It's almost like poetry to the ear. I really like to hear it spoken. And I can tell the difference between Japanese being spoken and Chinese being spoken. But I can't speak a word of either language. But I can pick up on the sound difference between the two. So, yeah. Do you have a favorite language, or is there if you don't speak a language, you think, oh, I'd really love to speak this language. What would it be for you?
That's a good question. I don't really have not seen enough cultural things like films and plays and stuff like that may be spoken purely in a foreign language.
Well, you said you were speaking German, even if just a few words of German.
Yeah, we tried to do learn,
kind
of brief ourselves on some terms that we would use, in a shop or conversing with a retailer or something while we were there, and did that.
And I've heard that German. Excuse me, I don't speak German. A few little words I can recognise, but I've heard German is a very difficult language.
Oh, I didn't get very
pick
very
up.
far. It was, and we were going to be there. Like I say,
It's just time.
What we could get, and of course it would be great to spend more time and learn it further. But I
Yes.
think Italian would be a great one. And it ties in with stuff I enjoy hobby wise and stuff.
Yeah.
So.
And I think if one speaks Italian, you're going to have a good grasp of Spanish, or at least attempt to understand it because of the connection between the Latin language, the Romance languages, and also French is the same. I think if you speak French, you'll be able to pick up on, you could figure out a lot of what's happening in Italian language and Spanish language. The German language, it seems so hard on the ear to me. I wish I spoke 100 languages. I think it's a wonderful thing. But also, when I see written German, all the words are about 36 characters long, and most of them seem to consist of either P or Z or Z. I have no clue what's going on here. So to me, it seems very, very complicated. Yeah. What other languages appeal to you, do you think?
Like I said, it would be interesting to be around Italian. Any of the, I'd like to be, it goes back to my, fascination I think we've talked to with the Nordic countries.
Yeah.
I think that would be very interesting to, hear some of those, on a regular basis and learn some of that.
Yes.
Swedish and such.
Yes, they are, to my ear, again, incredibly complicated languages. Some languages you can pick a few words up, even if for me, being English, I don't know, or maybe because I've spent time in France, I could hear Italian and kind of just get the gist of what's happening for sure. And the same with Spanish. I'd love to speak Spanish. But let me ask you this then. During your school days, were you required to learn a foreign language? Were they offered in school?
They were offered. You weren't required. A lot of people did. It just kind of depended on your curriculum that you chose. And here's where you're going to laugh at me. I did take 2 years of French.
Did you?
Couldn't speak a word of it right now to save my life. And we actually had a very excellent teacher because she was from France.
Yeah.
So she was very, immersed in it her whole entire life. But it's just something that didn't stick, or I wasn't as astute at paying attention then.
I think a lot of it is practice.
Oh, I'm
and
sure.
just being immersed in it. That makes such a difference.
Well, I think the best opportunity is if you grow up in a household, where parents can speak at least, between them two. You really can grow up with it, and that's amazing.
Now,
if not more.
As you know, I worked in Formula One for a number of years, which is a very international, multicultural business, and I was thrilled to be exposed to all of that. And I do remember one day I was walking through the paddock from our motorhome to the garage, or whichever way it was, and I passed a group of media personnel from the different teams. There was a young lady from Ferrari, there's a young lady from, let's say, from Benetton, there's a young lady from McLaren, and these ladies are all gifted in language. That's what they're doing. They're translating things for different media, so they're all very gifted in different languages. And I just started to have a quick chat with them on the way back to the garage, and I noticed as they were having a conversation, let's say there was 4 of them there, they seemed to be using 4 different languages between the 4 of them and absorbing it all so easily, but not bothering to change from now we're just going to speak Spanish, or now we're just going to speak English or German or whatever. Everyone was speaking their own different languages, but they're all just absorbing it. And I thought, what a wonderful thing that would be. There's like the universal communication between the world is just one huge language.
Exactly. I think when it gets to be so free flowing like that, your mind just goes to the easiest word and the easiest language, and it just falls into place. It may be much easier to say it in this language, just as a shorter syllable or something. Just just let it go with the flow, and then if somebody's very versed on the other side, they're going to pick up on all of it and know exactly what you told them.
Yes, I think language in travel is a great thing. I have heard that there are some languages where there are 20 plus words for snow, for example.
Yes.
And in English we have snow.
Snow.
So there would be a great example of if you could expand that to describe all these different things in one language. I think that'd be a wonderful thing.
Well, but as this topic was about language and communication, this is a perfect opportunity to bring up that we want to remind our listeners that we'd like for you to communicate with us.
Oh.
Send us your comments.
How about that segue?
Exactly. Isn't that perfect?
Very good.
Contact us at contact@matchettandtheotherguy.com and just send us your thoughts, ideas, suggestions, critiques, anything you want to send along, we'll accept them.
That's right. Learn a language is going to be one of them, I think.
Yeah, and I thought I'd actually read one today, just from a listener. This is from Christine F., who sent us something earlier a few weeks ago, and said, "Hi, Kevin and Steve. Thank you for sharing your thoughts via your weekly podcast. I am thoroughly enjoying listening while I cook and bake.
Ooh.
I've learned lots about English customs from listening. Plus, since I seem to be just slightly older than Kevin, much of his recollection of school days, toys, holiday customs, etc. bring back good memories.
Yeah.
We're F1 fans too, so Steve's experiences with that are also of great interest, but we like how you mix up the topics."
Well, that's good. Well, thank you very much for that comment. And yes, we'd love to hear more comments. And again, for those listeners who are new to us and have probably not listened to all 20, where are we now? We say 28?
28 on this one.
Yeah. The idea behind this podcast was just very basic, very simple. During our period of lockdown, when it is so difficult just to have a conversation, just to sit down and chat about nothing, that's what we thought we'd do. We just sit down and have a conversation about nothing. So we deliberately didn't base the podcast permanently about racing, although we don't mind talking about that. But as you can tell from our conversations, we don't mind talking about anything. And whatever subject we start on, we inevitably drift wildly off target and talk about other stuff. I hope you're okay with that, gentle listener, because
Hopefully it ends up in a better place most times anyway.
we can't change now. That's become the style of the podcast, and that's what it is, really. Yeah, great. More comments were like that. Well, we better think about signing off, hadn't we?
I think so for this time.
Yeah, so from me, au revoir. I'm from Kevin.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen. Very good. Bye now.